The outline of the talk is I'm going to start talking about the climate conditions, specifically in the areas that we're interested in, combine that a bit with the water quality that's available for irrigation, and give a little introduction to that. I'm going to talk about 3 different crops as case studies, as success stories for economically successful crops in desert areas with low quality water as irrigation sources. And then we'll talk about the cost of doing that. In spite of the success, what is it costing us? There's some environmental costs and some issues around it, and we'll talk about some of how to address those costs and to try to make what we're doing and how we're succeeding also sustainable. And in the end, I'll try to tie it together by asking some questions that'll put in place with the conference that we're at here today. So we've seen the map of Israel. I'm going to concentrate on Israel's deserts in the south, in the Negev. These are arid to hyper-arid zones with rainfalls patterns that we saw from about 300 to almost 0 millimeters per year. With evaporative demands, these are if we had an open water source, how much water we would lose in a single year. So ranging from 2 meters to 3.5 meters yearly. So we see that our water deficit is very extreme. That leads to these extreme arid climates. In spite of that, we have agriculture in these areas. The colored areas are where agriculture exists. Not in the entire area of this serious desert, but certainly in some big chunks of it. And it's clear that in order to have agriculture there, we need to irrigate with the kind of water depth that I showed you. In Israel in general, just so for some background, not just in the desert, our irrigation water that's available is more and more becoming recycled water, mostly from municipal sources, but also from industry. Some 85% of all of our wastewater is treated, recycled, and then used in agriculture. Just about 50% of all of our irrigation water in Israel today is such recycled water. A lot of that is both because we're recycling more, but also because we have less fresh water available as we've gone through some pretty severe drought years. Our other water that we have available, in addition to our good quality water, which I'm not even counting at all in these desert areas, is quite a bit in these deserts of brackish groundwater. We're pumping this water from as deep as a kilometer down to be able to get to it, and it's fairly salty. And just to mention, we're more and more seeing desalinated water in our system. We're desalinating water for drinking water, seawater. A lot of that water is then recycled after it passes through our cities and then reaches us as wastewater effluent. But we're getting also incidental use of that water as it goes into our water supply stream, and some of it's coming to farmers. And more we have actually directed use of desalinated water for high-value crops where farmers are willing to pay for it for reasons that we'll see as I continue in the talk. So I've been talking a little bit and showing these numbers with EC. EC is electrical conductivity. It's a measure of a relative measure of the salinity of the water, and I'll continue to use that. Just to put some things into perspective, good quality water would be, let's say, half a unit of EC. And in these areas that we're talking about today, we're ranging with recycled wastewater from 1 to 2 units of decisiemens per meter of electrical conductivity, and our groundwater that we're pumping and then irrigating with can reach from 2 to 5 in the same units. So we're talking really high concentrations of salts in the water. So what we want to do is take some of this desert landscape that looks like this and turn it into something more like this with date palms and citrus, or this with sweet potatoes, or this with olives, or even this where we don't see so much the green, but it's underneath the plastic and the nettings in an area that's growing vegetables in the winter with a lot of pepper and tomato production. And I threw in this picture. I was in Jordan last week, and on the other side of the border of the same desert that we share with our neighbor, we're seeing similar development and types of agriculture with these kind of protected housing. there too. So I'm going to tell stories about 3 different crops. I'm going to start with the date palm. Now, the date palm is a traditional native crop to these deserts. They exist for a long time there, but they exist where there's water. We find the dates in the oases. We find the dates where there's a spring, where it has basically unlimited water to be able to grow and to be. The story of dates as a modern productive crop means intensifying the crop itself. It means in addition to irrigating and fertilizing them intensively, it's intensifying the harvest technologies. It's intensifying pollinating, pruning, and other things into it. In the end, what we're getting is very high levels of yields, up to 150 kilos of fruit per tree per year, of very high quality fruit. These fruits, this fruit of the right varieties, the farmer is seeing about €5 a kilo for when he sells that fruit to markets abroad. All irrigated, not just irrigated with very, very salty water, up to 6 decisiemens per meter, in the same units of electrical conductivity that I've been discussed before, or recycled wastewater that would be a little slightly less salty, but also problematic. Our second story is bell peppers. Now, bell peppers aren't adapted at all to the desert. They don't belong there. They don't really do very well there. They're a crop that would like to grow in a more moderate climate in the summertime. But we're taking them into the desert in the winter and finding ways to make them grow to be able to get to markets in Europe where the prices are very high in off season. To do this, we're basically creating the whole environment for growth almost from the beginning. This can mean importing soils. Here we see some soilless culture. Here we see what we call nutritional trenches with some sands and other medias imported into doing it. Both those pictures are inside of protective housings. The protective housings have multiple reasons. They allow us to do trellising like this, get a lot of production in a small space. They allow us to reduce the climate demand, reduce the water demand inside the house itself by shading and by enclosing it, by raising the humidity inside. They allow us to do pest protection and plant protection much better, and they allow us in the end to get very high level quality of also very high yields of these peppers that are being exported, yields of up to 160 tons per hectare. And these as well are irrigated with brackish groundwater of up to 4 decisiemens per meter. The last crop I want to talk about are olives. Olives, of course, are a traditional crop been grown in the region of Israel for apparently up to about 6,000 years already, but grown very extensively up till the last 10, 15 years. Rain-fed with low production, and they would only happen in areas that would have about 500 millimeters of rain a year. As olive production is becoming modernized and intensified, not just in our region, all over the world, it means bringing in irrigation water, it means fertilizing them, it means mechanizing, it means very closer crop spacing, it means managing the trees for much higher yields. And what we found is then we can move them down into the desert as well, and we see that they're doing quite well with very high yields. This tree is full of fruit, with some special management that we need to do to take care of the salts, with yielding quite as good. And actually, one of the interesting things with olives is that we found that the stress caused by the salts is probably good for the olives, as it's increasing our oil quality, and the oil quality is just as important to the farmer in the market as the quantity of oil that he's producing, as far as the price he's getting. So we've seen some stories of success, and they have some things in common. The first thing is we're growing, it's an economic success. We're growing things for making money. We're not doing it for creating a food supply. A lot of that's due to having excellent growers that are using advanced technology. Big part of that technology is micro or drip irrigation. A few words about drip irrigation. It allows us to just wet the soil that we're interested in where the roots have to be, to provide plant water and nutrient needs efficiently where we need them, when we need them, and lets us give applications of water at a very high frequency, and lets us keep both high water content and good aeration in the root zone together, which is impossible with flooding and when we wet the entire surface in different systems. And it lets us keep the concentrations of salts from building up in the areas where the roots are being most active. So actually this brings us back around. The last thing that we really need to be able to be successful for this management of saline water in agriculture in the dry areas is we have to manage the salts. Now, the salts are going to cost us both as keeping water from being uptaken by plants and by when they get into the plants by being toxic to the plants. When we have the combinations of a high climate demand and low quality water, like I described at the beginning, we're basically pouring salts onto the system. As much as 6 tons per hectare, and for the peppers, 7.5 tons per hectare for the olives, 13 tons per hectare for the dates that I've described. We put the water and salts in together to our system with our irrigation water. The plants and the evaporation from the surface, the water loses water, but the salts stay in the system around the roots. If we want to get rid of those salts, we have to apply more water to leach. How much more water? Well, this is a picture of some of the work that I'm doing with fields of lysimeters to try to study that. I'm also using models, and I'll spare you from models. But just to go back to our model crops today, the date palm's up to 1,200 liters per day in the summer, and that's 30–50% more than their atmospheric needs for water are. The peppers in these greenhouses are watered twice the amount of water that they need for transpiration. That means half the water we're giving them is being used to leach salts. And the olives as well, especially in the wintertime, are getting quite a bit of extra water in order to keep the salts from building up in the root zone. Only by keeping those salts out are we able to keep up the yields. Now what happens to all that salts? It's not just salts, it's the water with the salts, it's fertilizer with the water, and it's contaminants that are coming up with them. We have to take care of those either by drainage and disposal, or maybe today we're even starting to consider desalination of the water before, in order to take care of the salts before we irrigate instead of having to take care of the salts afterwards. And this is becoming a real alternative for us. If you give me another half a minute, we can just see if we're using salty water, we need a certain amount of water to get maximum yields. If we desalinate that water, we can use half the amount of water, get 20% more yield. So to finish up, economic success is possible with salty water in agriculture in the desert if we're interested in high value crops and if we're using technology wisely. There's the consequences for using that, which are the need for leaching with the environmental implications that come along with that. If we want to be sustainable, we have to manage those salts, and we're working on ways of doing that, like I've mentioned. Can we apply Israel's achievements towards adaptation measures for those being faced by hot and dry climates more and more? Probably. We have to learn by Israel's accomplishments as well as our mistakes along the way. Irrigation is going to be necessary as we go into climates that are less reliable, and we can certainly share that, and we can talk about how to keep it sustainable. And with that, that's it. Thank you.